Professor Gentry studied operations research, which is what she's going to talk about tonight, at Stanford and at MIT, where she was a Department of Energy Computational Science Graduate Fellow, and she has designed optimization methods used for nationwide kidney-paired transplant donation registries in both the United States and Canada. And her work has attracted the attention of major media outlets, including Time Magazine, Reader's Digest, Science, Discovery Channel, and the Diane Rehm Show. And in 2009, she received the Mathematical Association of America's Henry L. Alder Award for Distinguished Teaching by a beginning mathematics faculty member. And her presentation this evening is entitled Faster, Safer, Healthier with Operations Research, and focuses on the ways that operation research has impacted our world for the better. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sommer Gentry.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I really appreciate all of your coming out here and being with me. I wanted to answer Amy's question first because she asked me to talk a little bit about women in STEM field, being a woman in the STEM field, and I have to say I am so grateful to all of the pioneering women who came before me, because I'm 35 and throughout my career I have never faced an actual institutional barrier that said, no, women can't major in that, women won't be hired for this position. Never at all. I've always been welcomed with open arms, and I'm pleased and happy to report that. Although I almost missed my calling because, and this is something I think that affects women and men equally, I didn't find math education in the junior high and high school level to be very exciting. It's just done in a way that's so rote and repetitive, and it's sort of like all the creativity has been mashed out of it somehow. At least that was my experience, and things may be changing. I'm always excited to participate in those kinds of enlivening younger grades math education. And so I know things are changing, and I hope that that won't always be the case. But it wasn't until sort of senior year of high school that I went off on my own to study for the Calculus AP test and was doing things by myself just with the book, and found that it got more creative and more fun as I went along. So decided to major in math, but there is one other way in which being a woman influenced my decisions, and that's that although I thought of myself as good at a lot of things, and I thought maybe I would be a novelist, and I thought maybe I would be a politician, and I thought maybe I would be an astronaut, and I would design buildings, and I had a million interests. I wanted to do everything. So why did I end up choosing math? I'll have to admit, partly it was that I got the message subtly, not from my professors, but from society, that women weren't supposed to be good at math, and that I probably couldn't do it. So, of course, I took that as a challenge, and I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to major in math because I just want to prove to everyone that I can be good at this. And so, in that sense, that's I think how being a woman in the STEM field influenced me, is that I just wanted to make my mark there because it was open to me. So to demonstrate that to everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about my field of mathematics, which is called operations research. And I'm hoping that you'll come away with the same sense of excitement and possibility and just importance of operations research that I always have when I'm working in this field. And that maybe it'll inspire you to either, if you're a student, try to study operations research in the future, or just pay attention when you see operations research in the media. Operations research was called by the Boston Globe the most important, the most influential academic discipline that you've never heard of. Right? Most people haven't heard of it, but operations research is everywhere around us. It's in scheduling models that decide when the nurses are going to work and which planes are going to take off from which cities and how plane tickets are going to be priced, etc. So I'm going to talk to you today about how to be faster, safer, and healthier using operations research. So operations research is the discipline of applying advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. This is the official definition of operations research given by one of my professional associations, which is called INFORMS, the Institute for Operations Research and Management Science. If you hear the term management science, that's the same thing as operations research. another synonym. Okay, so operations researchers work on questions like, if a dress manufacturer is laying out pattern pieces and needs to cut them out, how should those pieces be arranged so that you throw away the least fabric when you cut it out? And that means that you have to pay attention to details of dressmaking, such as, does the pattern have a weave that has to go in the same direction on all of the pattern pieces? Or is there a picture that has to match up when the two edges get sewn together? Those kinds of details become important. Operations researchers might also work on a question like, in Baltimore City, the fire department is facing budget cuts and they're required to close some fire stations for some parts of the day. Operations research might help you answer the question of which fire stations should be closed and for how long, so as to minimize the chance that there will be property damage or, heaven forbid, injuries from lack of fire protection coverage. So operations research can help answer a question like that. Or at a polling place, how long will the lines grow as people show up and they want to vote? And would it be better to devote extra resources to opening more polling stations at that one place or open a separate location? Which of those would help more people be able to exercise their right to vote? Or if you are a person waiting for a kidney transplant and you get an offer for an organ that has a slightly higher chance than normal of transmitting to you an HIV or a Hep C infection, right? Should you take that organ or should you wait on the deceased donor list while you're on dialysis? So dialysis is impacting you medically. 8% of the people on dialysis die every year waiting. But if you take this organ, it has a slightly higher chance of having Hep C. Now, if the organ were already demonstrating that it was Hep C positive, then you would know not to accept that organ. So then you start to have to learn these medical details about what's the window period? How long could it be if someone gets a Hep C infection in the very last few weeks of their life that you wouldn't be able to detect it in the organ, but it might still be transmitted? Well, it depends on the specific type of test that they're doing on the organ. So is it a nucleic acid test, et cetera? So then when you're working in operations research, you start to learn about all of these other client disciplines. You need medical details. You need to understand how an airline's business operations work. And that's, I think, one of the things that's really exciting about operations research. But I think the common thread is you can see that answering any of those questions is something that will influence the world around us for the better. And that's what's great about being in operations research, is I'm a mathematician and I can see the impact that my work has. All right, so I've talked a little bit about the applying part of this definition, that you have the opportunity to learn about other fields, medicine, business, and I've learned a lot about transplantation in the course of this. And so that was one of the reasons that I chose math and operations research in particular, is I thought it wouldn't constrain me and force me to choose just one thing that I wanted to study for the rest of my life. I would have instead this portable toolkit of methods that could be applied to answer questions in lots of different fields. So that's really why I picked it. It's because I didn't want to have to pick at all. And it's worked out that way. I learned a lot about the financial services industry when I was working for a credit card company, and I learned a lot about nuclear non-proliferation, and I'll get back to that later in the talk, when I worked at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. Okay, so that's the applying part. But what about the decisions? So operations research is specifically concerned with models where we have the opportunity to change the levers. We get to decide to sell an airline ticket for more or less money. We get to decide, yes, I do want to accept that kidney donation, or no, I'm going to wait for the next one. We have an actual opportunity to make an impact, and we can not only make decisions, we get to make better decisions, which means you have to have some notion of what's the objective. What makes this decision better than this one? For example, in linear programming, which is one of the canonical examples of operations research, an optimization model, you describe the thing that you want as a linear combination of the decisions that you get to make. Okay, so that's the better decisions, and then a little bit about the analytical methods. I mentioned linear programming. Incidentally, when I say linear programming, the programming part of that has nothing to do with computers. The term linear programming originated before there were any computers to program. It means linear planning, and the whole field was sort of invented by the US and UK military planners as part of World War II. They were trying to decide how to get equipment and soldiers to the right places at the right times so that they could win the war. So I'll say a little bit more about the analytical methods because those can be kind of fun. But I'll say, so the CEO of American Airlines, Robert Crandall, says that just the pricing problem, solving the problem of which tickets should be sold for how much money. Should I charge more for the people who are flying and returning during the week and less when they're flying and returning on the weekend? Just solving that pricing problem correctly makes American Airlines $500 million a year. So billions over the past decade just for this one company solving this one model. And then there are tons of other operations research models that go into the airline industry in particular. When to do maintenance on the planes, when is it less expensive to do maintenance, more expensive to do maintenance, what's the chance that you would have a maintenance problem that would delay a flight, how expensive is that for your airline when that happens. All of these things are sort of being done by operations research models in the background. And it's true that a lot of people work in operations research problems where the goal, the objective, is dollars, measured in money. But it's the funniest thing that I never was really turned on by a problem that had dollars as the objective. And my whole career has been essentially trying to avoid those problems and trying to get to work on problems where the objective has some other metric. And so that's how I ended up with this, a talk about how to be faster, safer, and healthier. So I'll just talk to you today about problems that don't have dollars as the objective, but they actually just make us live better. All right, so what kinds of things do we want to do faster? We can definitely agree that we would all want to make our work day go faster. And that's what operations research does for the people who work for UPS. UPS has a very large operations research group, and they have solved, or they've created a proprietary method for planning a UPS driver's route through the day. It's more complicated than it sounds at first, because, well, Google can give me driving directions from one place to another. So why should it be that I need a sophisticated and secret method to help me get to all of my destinations sooner? Well, the problem that Google Directions is solving is far easier than the UPS planning problem. Because for Google Directions, you're going from one place to one place. But if you're a UPS driver, you have a long list of destinations, and you don't know what order it would be best to visit them in. So this is actually a standard model called a traveling salesman problem. And it's very difficult to solve. In fact, UPS surely has not solved it perfectly, and I'll explain to you why that is. But what they're doing really works well. The drivers are saying that this model helps them finish their routes an hour or more earlier every single day. It has reduced the gas usage of the fleet because the cars are just being driven less. And also, the driving has actually become safer because one of the things that we do know about the algorithm is that it minimizes left-hand turns. So a left-hand turn involves a lot of delay because I might have to wait for the street to clear. It involves a lot of idling, which burns gas, and it involves possibly the risk of getting in an accident. So minimizing those things by rearranging the order in which I visit the UPS locations would make me safer and get me through my workday faster. So here's one of the original traveling salesman problems that had a cash prize. This was in the 60s. 33 cities, and this contest was won by a mathematician working in a team with one other person, and so I think they got their $10,000 grand prize back in the days before this was a very standard thing to do. And here's a demonstration of exactly how hard it is to solve the problem when I don't know what order I should go visit my pickup locations in. So why is this harder than just getting directions from place A to place B? It's way harder to go visit 30 places, but I'm not sure what order to visit them in. So if there are 33 places I have to be today, I have 33 choices of where should I go first. And once I've picked that, then I could go any of the other places next, so there are 32 choices of that. So there are 33 times 32 choices just of the first two places that I might go. And then there are 31 more places I have to go, so I have 31 choices again. And this is a factorial. It grows enormously fast. That's 33 factorial written all the way across the screen. And I actually had an argument once with a transplant surgeon who was telling me that his algorithm for kidney paired donation, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, was just perfectly fine because all it was a factorial number of comparisons. And it was working great on his data set, which had 8 patients in it. And so I said, what if you had 15 patients? And he plugged 15 factorial into his watch calculator, and then he said, it's not giving me an answer for some reason. It was too many digits to display on the screen. So, but yes, mathematics matters. So UPS is doing something smart about all of those different combinations. Obviously, they're not looking at every one, and maybe they haven't found exactly the right one, but if they're doing something smart with the traveling salesman problem, that's certainly very impressive. It's traveling salesman problem, oh here, this is a great joke. So when you get to the end, you realize, of course, this smart salesman on his computer has really just outsourced his problem to UPS. UPS still has to figure out how to get the packages there. Dynamic programming algorithms, that's another one of those fun, advanced analytic methods. And dynamic programming algorithms have this connection to recursive proof. I don't know if you've seen proofs by induction or recursion in computer programming. The idea that you can solve a problem of a certain form by solving a slightly simpler problem of the same form. And it really is quite magic when you see these dynamic programming algorithms work. But even that dynamic programming algorithm, n squared 2 to the n, that's terrible run-in time. That's considered unsolvable for any large problem. And so we have the situation where here's an example of a test case for traveling salesman problem that people work on. The cities are just points of the Mona Lisa that have been chosen to represent the picture. There are 100,000 cities there, and no one knows what the shortest tour of that is. No one knows. The best tour we know about, the best tour we can exhibit, is this 5,757, 191 units. But the only thing we can prove is that the shortest tour has to be at least 5,757 and 53. So that's the optimality gap. And there's a prize right now for $1,000 for solving this problem exactly. There's another prize if anyone were able to solve a traveling salesman problem in what's called polynomial time, to make a good algorithm for the traveling salesman problem. It's really the same thing as P equals NP, if you're familiar with that from computer science. It's one of these grand challenge problems that people have been working on for decades and decades. There's a $100,000 prize to anyone who can either find a fast algorithm for traveling salesman problem or prove it doesn't exist. So I guess maybe down to the end of it, it is really a problem about optimizing dollars in a way. Okay. So, and then how can we be safer? Well, for some reason we were going back to this. It's true, so less waiting in lines, I forgot, this one was the in the faster category. One result from queuing theory is based on Markov processes. Markov processes are this great melding of linear algebra with probability, and you can use it to prove all kinds of things about people waiting in lines. I mentioned people waiting in lines at the polling station before. One of the big results in queuing theory is that if you have multiple tellers at a bank, it's way better to have everybody wait in one line that feeds all the tellers than to have people wait in separate lines at each tellers. Everybody waits less when you do that, if you just have one big line. And I worked on a project for Wells Fargo Bank when I was in school, actually. We were looking at their lines, and actually we discovered that what they really needed to do was take this big potted plant out of their lobby, because there's something visually that was making people think when they went into this bank that they should line up in two places because of this potted plant. So the solutions can be of any form. Sometimes they're not advanced analytical methods. So what can we be safer from? A few years ago, I-35 West Bridge crumbled into the Mississippi River, and it killed 13 people. It was a great tragedy. After that, cities all over started to ask themselves, have we done everything we can to make sure our road network is safe? And there was a city, New Brunswick in Canada, that used an operations research model to start prioritizing its road maintenance. And this project won an Edelman Prize from the Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences, because it was such a great application that would actually help make people safer. The counterintuitive thing about that was that people had been using a worst first heuristic. We've got X dollars to spend on road maintenance projects, so let's find the worst, most dangerous road, the thing that is just about to crumble, and we will fix it. But fixing that road was very expensive and left very little money for maintaining the rest of the road network. And over time, they weren't actually using their resources effectively, because it would have been better to maybe even close some roads or maybe do some minimal maintenance rather than completely reconstructing those roads, and to apply more maintenance dollars to roads that weren't in such bad shape so that they would never deteriorate to the point of being the worst ever and needing a massive overinvestment to fix them. So that we can use operations research for. How can operations research keep us safe from nuclear warfare? Yes. So I worked in nuclear nonproliferation when I was at Lawrence Livermore Labs. This was right after we had signed the START treaty with the Russians, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. We decided with the Russians that we were all going to destroy our nuclear weapons material and make sure that it could never be used for a weapon again. So we were working in international relations really at the same time, because we had to convince the Russians that our plan for getting rid of this nuclear material would work. So plutonium has different isotopes, and it's plutonium-239, that's the isotope that you use to make nuclear weapons. If you mix plutonium-239 with lots of other isotopes, it's really hard to separate them again. So when you have nuclear weapons material, that means that it's very enriched for these 239 isotopes, and our plan was, well, let's just mix it with a bunch of junk isotopes, and it's so hard to separate them that now this material will be non-proliferatable. And what we'll do is we'll mix it all up in a big mixing vat and make it into these little hockey puck shapes and bury it in the ground at Yucca Mountain. So that was the plan, and there's already an interesting operations research project there. You have maybe only 5% plutonium-239, here's your 90% plutonium-239 that you're trying to get rid of. How big does this vat have to be? At what rate do we feed from each of the streams as we're mixing these things together to make the hockey pucks? And so, of course, but the real problem wasn't that. The real problem is that we had no idea what was in some of the streams. In fact, there was a lot of material that was left over from the early days of nuclear experimentation, and One canister, someone told me, was whatever they swept off the floor at Hannaford. So some of these streams weren't well characterized. And we had to decide how to mix them to make sure that the material coming out at the end wouldn't be able to be made into a bomb. So we used a different operations research technique called simulation. We're not sure exactly what's in here, but we have some guesses. So maybe there's, we're about half and half sure that this is either 30% plutonium-239 or it's 10% plutonium-239. So I have my computer draw random numbers, and half of the time my computer tells me that that's 30%, and half of the time my computer tells me that that's 10%. And we do that for all of these different streams that we don't know anything about. And we mix them together according to an algorithm that we've already decided. And then we ask about the pucks coming out at the end, what's the probability that any of these is still usable as a nuclear weapon? So that was using simulation to get the answers that we were looking for. And I not only had to make sure that this would work, but we had to convince the Russians that it would work. Incidentally, this is a funny story. These pucks, they made us souvenir pucks who were working on the project. Well, they didn't have any plutonium in them. It was just a little ceramic puck with this souvenir sticker on the top that said Plutonium Immobilization Project, and it had a picture of the atom, and it had like a picture of Russia, a picture of the US. And I left it in my bag going through airport security. It was quite a conversation that was there. But I knew exactly what was in that puck. Okay, so how else can operations research make us safer? Well, this is kind of a negative story, possibly, about operations research. This is a Ford Pinto. It used to explode whenever anyone would hit it from behind because of the placement of the gas tank. And it turned out that Ford knew about this problem, and they decided not to fix it because they calculated the amount that the company might lose from lawsuits, and they calculated that it was less expensive to pay off a few people who might be injured by this than to repair the problem. But when that reasoning came out in court, it turned out that Ford lost far more than they expected because of the deterioration of the value of their brand. They looked like they didn't care, and so that really hurt them a lot. But I would say that didn't happen, that decision didn't happen because of operations research. That decision was actually a poor analysis of the situation because they missed the fact that hurting people would harm their brand so greatly. So they really just miscalculated, I would say. But counteracting that, there is the operations research analysis of safety measures. Safety measures like putting kids in car seats. Yes, putting kids in car seats makes them safer. These are kids in car seats on planes. But you know what? The FAA doesn't require kids to be in car seats on planes. You can take a child under 2 years old onto a plane without buying an extra ticket for them and just have that child sitting in your lap, not belted, not restrained in any way. And it's true that it's more dangerous for that child to be sitting on your lap than to be belted into a car seat. So why would the FAA allow this? It seems to make no sense. Until you consider the alternatives. So this is what operations researchers ideally do. They don't focus just on the issue of would a child be safer in a car seat or not in a car seat. They're looking at the whole system of decisions surrounding buying your child an extra ticket for a plane trip, which would make that plane trip more expensive. And when flying is more expensive, people might substitute. And so people might substitute flying for driving. And so if they're driving their children places, the fact is that more children will die if the FAA requires children under 2 to be belted in car seats on planes. They estimated that about 9 children would be killed in car accidents if the FAA required kids to be belted in car seats for every 1 child who might be rescued from an injury on an airplane. So I guess the moral of the story is anything that causes substitution away from flying hurts safety. It actually kills people. And this is the argument I keep making about the TSA, because what the TSA is doing irritates people and might cause a few of them to decide to drive rather than fly. And if that's true, then the TSA is actually hurting our safety. But this argument doesn't seem to translate. So that's all about being safer. And now healthier. This is the part that I've worked the most closely on. Here's a project that I didn't do, but this is really awesome work that a lot of people in operations research do. They're doing radiation therapy planning for tumors. When you have a tumor and you want to kill it by directing poisonous radiation at it, you want to kill all the cells in the tumor, but you don't want to kill your healthy tissue. And the problem is that you can only aim that radiation at the tissue by shooting it straight all the way through the body. And the radiation doesn't discriminate. It injures and damages and kills things all the way along its path through your body. So what you'd like to do is arrange the beams so that the doses for all of the non-tumor parts of your body are low, and the doses on the tumor are high enough to kill it. This is a mathematical optimization problem. This one is very hard to solve. It's an integer programming problem. And some codes run all night long, generating a specific plan for a specific patient. But what's amazing, I think, about this is actually mathematics planning a treatment for a patient. Truly, there's a ton of work in operations research in the operations side of healthcare, which is how do you schedule people for appointments, how many nurses do you need in your clinic, how much should people pay for various things, and insurance, and all of that. There's a ton of that. But this is a mathematical program doing the medicine, doing what otherwise a doctor would be doing, saying this is the treatment that this patient will get for this disease. Here's another view of the same thing. This is a brain, so that's the brain stem and that's the tumor. All of this tissue around is healthy tissue, but some of it sort of could absorb more damage, and some of it really is so fragile that you don't want to damage it at all. And there are numbers, not here, there were numbers on my previous picture, that describe how bad it would be to radiate this. How bad is it to irradiate that? 20. How bad is it to irradiate that? That one's really bad to irradiate. This one's really bad to irradiate. And this is the tumor that we have to get a minimum dose on. So now you're adjusting the penalty. You're adjusting the objective to say your objective is to minimize the dose, but in particular minimize the dose in these special places. And the other thing that I've used operations research to do is get more people a kidney transplant. This is a problem that my husband brought to me. After we were married and while I was trying to finish my PhD thesis, this distracted me from my thesis, but it was a good distraction. So, if you are waiting for a kidney transplant, the best thing for anyone who has kidney disease would be to get a transplant, but there aren't enough deceased donors, not enough by far. But some people have living donors, people in their family or just people that they know who are willing to give up a kidney so that they can receive one. And the donors actually do really well. It's a fairly safe operation. It's all minimally invasive. People go back to work the same week sometimes. So there's a lot of people willing to be living donors for their family members, but about a third of the time those offers have to be rejected because the donor is the wrong blood type to give to the recipient. Or they may have some other kind of incompatibility that prevents the kidney from going to the recipient. So this is this all-important organ. We have two, but you function very well with one. One donor told me, I think God gave me two so I could give one away. For instance, this donor in blue wants to give to the recipient in blue, but they're not compatible. And this donor in gray wants to give to the recipient in gray, but they're not compatible. However, it's an easy matter to get these two pairs together, and the kidney from pair 2's donor is compatible with pair 1's recipient, and vice versa. kidney pair donation is upside, because otherwise neither donor would be donating at all. So even if you do one kidney pair donation, you're happy because you brought 2 new donors into the system who wouldn't have donated otherwise. But why is that a mathematics problem? Why did it come to me? Well, here's a representation of all the information for pair donation as a graph. This pair, we put in each circle the donor and the recipient. This B blood type donor can't give to an A blood type recipient. But in pair 2, there's an A blood type donor who can't give to a B recipient. Since this A donor could give to the recipient in pair 1 and the B donor could give to the recipient in pair 2, we draw a line connecting them, an edge. So I've got nodes and edges, and the edges connect places where I could conceivably do a paired donation. So I already see why I need optimization. I have to make a smart decision about which families exchange with which other ones so that the largest number of people can get transplanted. If these 2 exchange, then pair 1 and pair 4 don't get an opportunity. And it seems that it might be simple to see that in this situation, but what would be the right choice to make in this graph? Which pairs, which families should exchange kidneys so that the largest number of people can get a transplant? And the colors here show you sort of best case and worst case. These blood types are, and the links are representative of what we think the real number of links would be for actual pairs in a kidney pair donation program. So some of them have no matches, but a few have only 1 match, right? Like 0 can only match with 22. If we did all of the exchanges in the purple lines, only 10 people get a transplant. But if we do instead the exchanges on the green lines, 14 people get a transplant. And so there's a need for this optimal matching. The way that you find this matching is called the Edmonds algorithm. It finds a maximum cardinality matching. A matching is just any set of edges in this diagram. I pick the edges and I put them in the matching, where no 2 edges in the matching touch the same node. And that's important because obviously there's only really 1 donor there. That 1 donor can't give to 2 recipients. So Edmonds wrote this great 60s paper called Paths, Trees, and Flowers, where he described the method for getting this solution. And it was called the most complicated graph algorithm that anyone had ever described to that point. And so that meant it played a historically important role in developing the very idea of a polynomial time algorithm. A polynomial time algorithm is one that is fast enough that you can, in practical terms, solve any problem that you want to. Edmonds' algorithm is polynomial time, but it was so complicated that it took a lot of arguing to be able to convince oneself that it is, in fact, polynomial time. So that's sort of like important in the history of computer science as well. So we might have been done, except that in order to make kidney pair donation a reality, we actually needed an act of Congress. And that's because pair donation was possibly banned by the National Organ Transplantation Act, which said you can't give a kidney for valuable consideration. So if you give someone a kidney that's A blood type so that you can receive a kidney that's B blood type, is that an exchange of valuable items? Is it similar in any way to selling a kidney? That was the trouble. So that meant that the United Network for Organ Sharing, which is the organization that it would make the most sense to run this registry, couldn't act. So how did we get this act of Congress? It turned out that also required some mathematical work, some operations research work to convince Congress to act, because most people thought this wouldn't really apply to very many pairs. One analysis said only 3% of the people who have an incompatible donor will find a match through pair donation. We know now that it's far, far higher than that, probably 70 to 80 with the current methods. But people thought this won't really apply to anyone. There aren't really people out there who could get transplanted by this method, so We had to prove that that was wrong. But the problem is, we didn't have any data, because in the absence of paired donation, when you showed up with an incompatible donor, your doctor just sent you home. No one even wrote down the fact that you would have had a donor of this other blood type. So we didn't know who was out there who had an incompatible donor. So we turned again to simulation. Simulation, if you don't have any data, just make some up. What we did is we invented virtual people and their blood types. Not just their blood type, but their blood genotype. This person has 2 O's, which means all of their children will get one of those O's from them. And this father has a B and an O, which means that the children have a 50% chance of getting either the B or the O. So the people in purple have population average genotypes. But since most of your likely donors are in your family, and families inherit blood types from each other, we couldn't just choose random patients. We had to have random patients who were related to each other. So we chose random genotypes for the blood type of the mother and the father, but then the children actually inherit their blood types from the mother and the father. Now we have the appropriate linkage between how likely are you to have a family member who has the right blood type to be able to donate to you. So we created these families, virtual families inside our computer, and we fed them into a model that, again, simulated whether these people were healthy enough to be a donor, whether they were willing to be a donor, and whether, if they were willing and they were healthy, whether they would have the right blood type and tissue type to be able to donate to their family member. And as we created more families and fed them into the top, if there was a possibility of giving directly to your family member, then they went into the direct donation bucket. And some people didn't have anyone who could donate at all. And some families had a donor who was incompatible. So we just kept creating more families at the top, feeding them in, until we had as many people in our direct donation virtual family group as there were live donations last year. Then at that time, how many were in the incompatible bucket? That was our estimate of the number of families that were out there with an incompatible donor. And this was far higher than anyone thought it had been, could have been. Not only did we know how many incompatible donors there were, we knew exactly what their blood types were and how likely they were to match people. So now we could prove to the world that this might allow an extra 2,000 live donations every year. That would be the biggest increase in live donation ever seen. And right now, because of the fact that we did this, we really did get an act of Congress. And in 2007, Congress passed the Charlie Norwood Memorial Act, which said that Congress had never intended to ban paired donation, and that paired donation was explicitly legal. And as soon as that happened, we donated our algorithms to the United Network for Organ Sharing to let them set up the first nationwide paired donation exchange. So that was the power of demonstrating numerically how many people would be affected by that, and it only happened because of simulation. And I think I'm going to skip this next piece. In reality, there are some exchanges are favored over other ones. For instance, if the donor has an exactly perfect matched kidney for one of the recipients, or if one of the recipients is a child, children are being greatly impacted by not having a working kidney because it's stunting their growth. So children are usually favored in these algorithms. But I think I'm not going to talk about this. Instead, I'm just going to get to my conclusion, which is that operations researchers are really lucky. This is an article about our work in Time magazine. If you're working in operations research, you don't have to struggle to explain to people what impact you might have on the world or why what you're doing is important. So the media loves operations research, and it gives you this great platform for selling mathematics to people all over the world. And I've heard that women are sometimes turned off of STEM fields because they want to be in helping professions. But I always tell my students, you can become a math major so that you can save people's lives. And that is just not an exaggeration. Mathematics does make a difference. And that's what's great about operations research, is that I think it shows how mathematics should be a career choice for the people who are excited about making a difference in the world, people who want to be entrepreneurs, and people who want to be humanitarians, and all of these things are places where mathematics makes a big difference, and that's what I'd like to say.
Do we have questions?
I have a good question. The hockey pucks that you generated, do you remember what the percentage was that it was okay to have too much plutonium? Did you settle for 1% in the simulation, or was it 5%? I mean, what was the percentage that you seemed to be okay with?
I don't remember exactly. This is the threshold of it being usable as a nuclear weapon versus being usable as nuclear fuel. And that, you'll see that comes up in the news when we talk about Iran and their new, enrichment process. This is exactly the same question. What's the number beyond which, if you have isotopes more pure than that, then you can use them to make a nuclear weapon? But I don't remember what the number was. It wasn't the percent of plutonium. It was the percent of plutonium-239 isotopes compared to other isotopes of plutonium. That is the critical question. Yes?
So when you have a child that needs a kidney transplant, is the donor going to be a person of a similar age, or can an adult donate it?
An adult can definitely donate a kidney to a child, and that happens a lot. Parents donate to their kids when they need transplants.
Any other questions?
It's kind of amazing. The kidney goes back to its original size. Yes, I saw a talk about pediatric kidney transplantation, and sometimes the kidney would take up like half of the child's torso, but then it becomes the right size for the child after that, and then it grows with them. It's amazing. It's just phenomenal. My husband, Dory Segev, he was in that picture that I showed you last. He says that the reason he loves to work in transplant is that the people get better, that his patients can just walk out the day after they have a transplant and they've gone from being miserably sick to just getting their whole life back. And it's a transformation. It's really miraculous, but I've been lucky to learn a lot about it, to get close to this field of transplant surgeons and transplant doctors. They're really smart, and they want to learn about developments in other fields that can actually help them. And this was an example where people had started to set up kidney exchange registries. Let me take us back to this. And this problem was so tempting for non-mathematicians to say, I can think of a heuristic that'll work here. I think I should first choose all of the edges that touch the fewest number of nodes. And I think I should choose the edge with the highest number of points first. And all of those heuristics fail. There are pathologic cases where they all go wrong. I mean, there was an actual registry using a suboptimal algorithm that found 2 exchanges, 2 transplants where there could have been 4. This was returned by the algorithm. And luckily, it was small enough days that all the physicians were on the phone together and they discovered it by hand. They said, oh, okay, so we're going to do this 1 transplant next month, your patient here, your patient there. And they said, wait, didn't you have another pair with this blood type? And didn't you have, and they discovered it before it was too late. But the fact is that the mathematical algorithms really made a big difference.
Does this have applications to other organs like livers and corneas and stuff?
Not this particular phenomenon of exchange, because the matching isn't the same for livers. But I am actually working in liver transplant on a completely different problem. In liver transplant, the problem is that you're geographically disadvantaged. For instance, if you live in California, it's very, very hard to get a liver transplant. And if you live in Tennessee, it's very easy to get a liver transplant. That's why Steve Jobs flew to Tennessee in order to get his transplant. That's because livers have to be transplanted very quickly after they are recovered, and so you can't fly a liver a very long way away. So you share the liver with people near you, and there are these arbitrary sharing regions that were never set up for the purpose of making liver transplant fair. And what we're doing is using redistricting models like gerrymandering. We're gerrymandering the liver allocation districts and saying, well, instead of sharing with this group, you should share with that state. And instead of these livers going this direction, they should really go north. And so we draw new boundaries, and the regions that we design will make it fair that you will have the same chance of being able to get a liver transplant no matter where in the country you live. This is one of the biggest issues in transplantation is geographic inequity, and haven't been able to do anything about it for 10 years because there are sort of warring interests on both sides of the question. And when we started to talk about using mathematical redistricting, everyone jumped on it because they said, we can take the egos and the financial motivations out of this and say, look, we agree on the principle. The principle is you ought to have an equal chance of getting a liver no matter where you live, and the other principle is the livers can't go any farther than X number of hours. And from there, it's out of our hands. It's not that the physicians at this center say, you should give me more of this, you should give me more of that. Now it's an objectively determined allocation system. So it looks like there will actually be movement on that for the first time in a decade since it was ordered that there should be a fix for the geographic inequities in liver.
So are these registries, are they funded by the government, or are they a nonprofit? They're funded by the government?
Yes, the government, the Department of Health and Human Services contracts the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network and says, you're in charge of allocating deceased donor organs. Because they are a national resource.
And there's not an organization that, that has a profit motive, so to speak.
I mean, a lot of organizations involved have profit motives. The hospitals have big profit motives, particularly where liver transplant is concerned.
As far as reducing patient costs, you mean?
No, actually, liver transplant is very well-paid field, and the hospitals, some hospitals generate most of their operating revenue from this one operation, which is liver transplant. And so anything that changes which hospitals those livers might be allocated to is extremely sensitive and hard to change. But the idea that there could be a mathematical best answer, this is the way we should allocate livers if we all agree that what ought to happen is it ought to be fair to people in every place, was the way that there could be movement forward. I don't know how likely it is that we'll ever have voting districts designed by computer, but I can dream, can't I?
I agree.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Professor Gentry.